5 people from Madison were among the 6 suspects arrested so far as part of an investigation into fentanyl shipments to the Wisconsin capital. The people were allegedly part of a plan to ship over 5 kilograms of that deadly drug through mail. In addition to the 6 people already taken into custody, law enforcement agents have obtained warrants for the arrest of 2 others. As law enforcement rounded up the suspect, they also reported finding 6 guns, one of which was converted to be fully automatic. In a statement announcing the arrest, Attorney General Josh Kaul said, quote, "We are committed to dismantling the networks that traffic this and other dangerous narcotics and to holding those who sell fentanyl and other dangerous drugs accountable," end quote. All of the suspects are facing federal drug trafficking charges.